Good morning. I'm from CATCH. That stands for Citizens Against Technological and Community-Based Harassment, and hopefully by the end of this talk you'll know what that means. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to come here and talk. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate the help that we've been getting from the TRCC for the last year. To start out, I just want to propose a scenario to you. Imagine if you lived in a world where a rapist didn't have to fear suffering any consequences for anything he did, ever. Imagine what that person would do without any fear of consequences. This is the kind of situation that we exist in the perpetrators of the crime that I'm going to talk to you about. I also want to talk to you about another hypothetical situation. Let's say, for example, we lived in a world where everything that you believed you had to prove was true. And if you couldn't prove that it was true, you got locked up in a mental institution and was medicated. So, for example, say you believe in God, and someone said to you, well, you have to prove that God exists in order to have that belief, or we're going to lock you up. That's the kind of situation also that people in my situation face, in that although we have a belief of a situation, it's something that's very, very hard to prove. So I'm going to talk to you about a couple of things that most of you probably haven't heard about before. One is non-lethal weapons, and the other is a kind of stalking that's done by groups of people. And hopefully when I'm done, you'll go away with a fresh perspective on these two things. Probably you have some perspective on them already. Also, I'd like to show you, hopefully, that a lot of this information you don't have because it's suppressed in the media, and it's been suppressed for the last 40 years at least. And lastly, what I'd like to come out of this is that when you come across people in a situation like ours, that you will think of us and refer people to CATCH in the future for support. I did a mailing this summer to all the groups here, and I'm not sure if you got the pamphlet, but I've handed it out again, and I've added a couple of articles in there that weren't in there with the other mailing. Basically, I'd like to leave questions to the end, but just because I have a lot of information to cover, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to cover it. But you know, if there's something that you really want to ask, go ahead. It's not a hard and fast rule. Basically, with regard to belief, what happens in a situation like ours is that people may believe that they're being targeted with microwaves or zapped. Those are the common terms that people often use. The other thing that they may believe is that they've been implanted with a microchip. And thirdly, they may believe that they're being stalked or followed by groups of people. And normally what happens when someone says those three words, microwaves, implants, and you know, exhibit some kind of paranoid behavior, the first thing that happens is that people suggest they get medicated. And the problem with that is that not only in this day and age are these things possible, they're probable. So you first need to determine whether or not that's true before jumping to the conclusion that the person may be having some kind of delusion. There are three facts I'm going to share with you. One of them is about non-lethal weapons. And so I have posters made up. And I thought that after I'm done, because you can't see the posters, that I'll just leave them around if you want to read what's on them. Oops, not that one. So the first one is about non-lethal weapons. And the basic idea here is that they're not new. They've been around for at least 30 years. And you can find evidence of that. There is documentation. And what happens is that the media doesn't talk about it. So we get a situation like this, where we get an article in the Toronto Star, June 2005, that talks about this non-lethal weapon called the Scream. And talks about it as being new. And then they describe the effects, and this article is in your package if you want to read it. And then if you go and you look at a Naval Academy document that was released in, I think it was 97, they document a non-lethal weapon called the Squawk Box that was used in 1973 on protesters in Ireland. And it's got almost the same description as this new Scream, and that was 33 years ago. They also document another one that was used in France in 72 on protesters as well, and it's also very similar to the Scream. So there's 33 years here, but chances are that what the media is telling you is that this is new, and that's not true. In addition, there are two categories of non-lethal weapons. One is what you'd consider the high-tech stuff, the stuff developed by the government, and the other would be, or the military, and the other would be the real basic homemade kind of non-lethal weapons. There's stuff available on the internet for people to buy. These are all about sound weapons, weapons that are created with sound rather than microwaves, but there are the two kinds. And this is a sound weapon. It's called the Phaser Blast Wave Pistol, which you can buy off the internet. And it talks about routing out animals, but it also throws in that you could point it at people if you wanted to. There are books, like this one, called High Tech Harassment, How to Get Even with Anybody Anytime, that gives you the plans for how to build more non-lethal weapons. This is a sound blaster. It'll make people, your neighbors, nauseated. So for example, people in your house are getting sick. Actually, it tends to happen when people live alone more often than not. Groups of people tend not to be targeted. So you live on your own, and you're nauseated, and you feel sick, and you don't know what the problem is, and it's possible that your neighbor has a grudge against you and has picked up one of these. But you're not going to know it because you've never heard of that, right? And I've got them listed in the brochure. There's also a book called The Poor Man's Ray Gun, which describes how to build a microwave weapon from your microwave. And you can point it at someone through a wall, and it will burn whatever it's pointed at.
So non-lethal to me.
Yeah, well, that's why that's a whole other argument. So the second fact refers to implant technology, and this is one of the most curious things. Is that, of course, as soon as someone says implant, you see it in the papers. You see it with people like Timothy McVeigh and that kind of thing. Oh, well, he must have been schizophrenic because he was talking about having an implant. But the reality is that implant technology is very, very old. It goes back to at least the early 50s, and so we're talking about 50 years of development. And I'll show you something I picked up off the internet. The website is on here. You're welcome to go and look it up. This is called the ID Sniper prototype. And it involves a gun. It involves a very, very tiny tracking implant that works on GPS. So it works by satellite. Basically, they say on this website that if you shoot it at someone, it doesn't feel anything more than getting a mosquito bite. So that basically the person doesn't know. And also they show the tracking software, so they show some in North America showing the position of that person constantly. And they show that you can take a picture of the person. Interestingly enough, they put a priest there, I don't know why. But you can take a picture of the person that you shot. Yes, that's right. He's an undercover agent. Or he's a terrorist. So this gives you. The fact is that you're going to read, if you read anything about implants, you're going to read that tracking chips are a long way off. And that's not true. In this month's Scientific American, there's an article about a man named Jose Delgado. And he was a neuroscientist who worked from the 50s to the 70s, then he left the country after the early 70s. The forgotten era of brain chips. Actually, it's more like the suppressed era of brain chips, but anyway. He invented something called the stymosiever. This is it. It's blown up. It's much larger than it is in reality. This could be implanted in the 1950s in a person's brain without surgery. They could put it in through the nasal cavity or through the ear. And once they had it in, they could remotely control a person. It worked on the FM radio band. And there was a famous experiment where he implanted one in a bull, and he stood in front of it, and as the bull ran toward him, he pressed a button, and the bull stopped dead. And that was because it had one of these stymosievers implanted in its brain, and that was 50 years ago. The third fact has to do with not the technology, but the stalking. Actually, there was one thing I wanted to mention. There's a BBC Online article called Security Under the Skin. It was a year ago. And there's a quote in there, and it was about microchips. And there's a quote in there from a civil liberties campaigner who said, "In the wrong hands, it would be the stalker's dream." If you can imagine what it would be like for the stalker, the ex-husband, maybe he has some money, maybe he has some connections. He implants his wife. She doesn't know it because, of course, implants aren't real, and he starts harassing her with some of this technology. You can drive a person completely crazy, and part of that has to do with lack of education and lack of truth that's out there, because a person doesn't know what it is. They don't know what's happening to them, and chances are very good that almost everybody around them is going to think they're mentally ill as soon as they start talking about it. Anyway, so I'll switch gears for a minute. You're probably familiar with vigilantes targeting political people, abortion workers, whistleblowers. You may have heard of that. There are articles. Actually, these two are on the Catch website, but they're not in the package. And they talk about some of the tactics that they use, but basically it amounts to groups of people harassing individuals for some reason or another. And often corporations will hire these groups to go after whistleblowers. What has happened, for reasons that we can only speculate, is that these groups have also targeted people who are not political for one reason or another. And there was a book, an excellent book called Terrorist Stalking in America by David Lawson, and he had infiltrated these groups both in the U.S. and Canada, and he wrote a whole lot about them and what they do. And I'll read you a couple of quotes. There's a sheet also in here under the appendix that has quotes from his book. So this kind of stalking, it's called cause stalking, vengeance stalking. We call it gang stalking in our group, but group stalking, whatever you want to call it, it's done by groups of people. Cause stalking has been used by extremist groups since the early 1990s. The basic system is alleged to have been developed by the Ku Klux Klan and refined through years of use. Groups do not just stalk individuals. They employ organized programs of harassment which include break-ins, property damage, assault, and occasionally even death. The children of a target are a favorite. One extremist leader told me that his group could do whatever a target can do and go wherever he goes. We will do anything to achieve our objectives, he said. As well as political targets, abortion workers, whistleblowers, etc., groups also attack targets of convenience. These people are selected because they are convenient and not for any other reason. They're used for practice. When a stalking group moves into a neighborhood, there's an increase in the number of break-ins, noise, and it will become a high-traffic area. And I think one of the most important points is that these groups are cults. There's a cult mentality behind them, and it's more important to the individuals doing the stalking to network with each other and talk about the target and have that connection rather than any face-to-face interaction with the target. That is completely secondary. And he says that the target doesn't have to know they're targeted. It's not necessary to the stalking group for them to let the person know. The person may just think that they have a lot of bad luck, or there's a lot of really rude people in the world, that kind of thing, and they are still achieving their objective because it's not about interacting with the target, it's about themselves and their group and feeling a part of something, having this. They use cars, they get people on foot, they have cell phones that, on a certain channel, I guess, that they talk to each other. And according to David Lawson, the leaders of these groups, or whoever gives the order to do this to someone, they're shadowy figures. The group members don't know who they are. They don't know where they come from. There's some implication that maybe they're, intelligence people or who knows, right? But the group itself does not know who's giving the order to do this, and that's what makes it so incredibly hard to prosecute, because they every step along the way, they make the connection from one level to another very difficult to follow, and there being lots of people, even for the target themselves, well, what are they going to do, right? You see a different person doing something every day. It sounds, to try to go to the police and say that, it just sounds like you've lost it. I happened to be very, very, very fortunate. I got sick and tired of what was taking place, and I bought myself a video camera. And the first day out, I took my camera and I went to my car. And the camera was fairly small, not much bigger than my hand. And I sat in my car and I turned it on to see, to start filming. And I didn't realize what I was getting, because I was sitting there and I played with the zoom function, and all of a sudden I zoomed about 70 feet away from the car, and I saw someone hiding behind the bushes. And I filmed 5 minutes of something that is really quite remarkable, and probably I won't get again. So I took some still pictures. I brought the video if anyone's interested in seeing it at some point. But I just gathered a section of still pictures of what was happening. So I'm sitting in my car, and this person, I put a little circle here, he's way, way off. I couldn't see him with my naked eye. I discovered him by zooming in with the camera. And I saw him there. And he was staring at me. He sat there for 5 minutes while I sat in my car. A couple of people came by. They both turned around and looked in my direction. And the thing you have to remember is that I was a long way away from them. I wasn't right across the street. They couldn't see what I was doing. And I picked up a few things as I was going through this video that I hadn't picked up while I was sitting there. And one of them was this white car pulled up. The guy in the bike gave it a signal with his hands. So I thought, okay, well, fine, maybe he was just moving his hands. But the curious thing is that this white car went by, and then a minute later it came back, and then a minute later it went by again. And the reason I know that is because it was missing a hubcap, and you can see it on both of these pictures. And then this guy came along, and as soon as he rounded the corner, he was looking at me from like way, 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 way off, right? And he rode right up the street toward me, staring at me the whole time, came right by my car. So I've got pictures of all this, and basically, if you get a close look at their faces, which is kind of important here, you'd think I was like tap dancing naked on the hood of my car, because they all look so shocked. But there's no reason for them to be looking like this. So you might want to take a closer look at some of those pictures. This is something that is very unlikely. This kind of, the video itself is a little bit more telling. The stills don't quite do it, but you can see that there's something going on there. I have my computer, so I can play it for someone on the computer, if you want to look. Too much time left.
9.5 minutes here.
Okay.
Are you going to tell us what it was? Who were they? Do you know?
I don't know who they were. You mean, did I know them personally?
Do you know the circumstances? You're describing a stalking, a group
Yeah,
stalking
yeah,
incident.
yeah.
Do you know anything about the circumstances of that group stalking?
My own personal situation?
Mhm.
No, I don't know. I'm one of the many who have no specific reason for it to be happening to.
Okay.
So,
Lawson describes the reason almost exclusively is because of lies told.
yeah. Yeah,
Vicious
he
lies.
specifies that in order for these people to do this to someone, they have to be told lies about the person. So I don't know what they would be telling the people. It looked to me, it occurred to me, that maybe there's some community watch thing possibly gone bad. That they can get a group of people who think that they're doing something, a service for the community if they think this person has done something. And they're known to do that. I have an article online that is a similar kind of targeting for a pedophile who moves into somebody's neighborhood, right? The neighbors don't do something directly because they don't want to be prosecuted, but they harass the person in an indirect way until the person leaves. Basically, those are the two issues, and they may not seem connected, but it appears for the last 3 years that I have 3 websites online, and I'm in contact with quite a few people who are targeted, that in most cases they get both. They get both the electronic or non-lethal weapons, and they get the stalking. And it appears that the purpose is to keep a constant presence in the person's life, to raise the stress level. A lot of people are gonna lose it because of it. A lot of people are going to end up committing suicide because of it, because of the isolation and the lack of belief on the part of people that they're telling. There is a situation where, and I'm not an expert on it, but there is the situation perhaps where it is delusional. I don't know how to tell the difference, but it seems pretty obvious to me from the hundreds of people that I've talked to over the last 3 years that the people who I tend to believe are the ones who seem to be grounded, and the ones who I tend to wonder if maybe they're possibly imagining some things are the ones who the delusion tends to extend into all kind of aspects of their being. It's not just this one thing. So it becomes obvious, but I can't say for certain. All I'm saying and all I'm asking is that you keep an open mind if someone says that to you. And not immediately judge that it can't be happening, because the fact is that the technology is there and it can be happening.
Lots of break-and-enters and sabotage make
Yeah.
it certain that it is happening in many cases.
Yeah, well, there are definitely other aspects to it other than the stalking. There is the sabotage of your personal items. A lot of people's cars get sabotaged so that they're having to repair them every 3 months, and a lot of costs that tend to get incurred. A lot of people have reported that their animals were killed. That tends to be quite a common occurrence, and sometimes in my own personal situation, there was a lot of stuff going on before I knew what was happening. Just bizarre things that were taking place, but because I didn't think that, and I'm not a suspicious person, I didn't think that anything was going on, but there was definitely, stains appearing in my house, my carpet, this kind of thing on a regular basis, my house, parts of my house being vandalized and that kind of thing, and not really knowing, and not really thinking about it, actually. I mean, That's the reality. Regarding the non-lethal weapons, I have to say that even if you don't believe that these kinds of things could be in the hands of regular people now, we're coming to a point where sooner or later it's going to happen. Sooner or later, there are going to be people who are going to get access to these. Sooner or later, the microchips, if you don't believe that these tiny tracking chips exist now, sooner or later they will exist. So regardless of if you believe it's here now, we know that it's coming. Whether it's 5 years or 10 years or 15 years from now, this situation is going to be a reality. And this is a stalker's dream. Oh, sure.
Is it okay to ask?
Yeah, sure.
If somebody approached you and were talking about somebody's symptoms, how can you stop it? Like, what is there to do? Like, what would you suggest to them, or how would you stop what was going on with you?
People tend to be victims of this for many years. Usually it doesn't stop. Now, I met Gloria Naylor a couple of weeks ago. She's the author of The Women of Brewster Place. And she was targeted in '96, and her book is going to be released at the end of November. Now, she says basically it lasted essentially a year. But there are traces of it kind of here and there as she goes through, but that's the exception rather than the rule. The rule tends to be, she's also a high-profile person, and she may have enough power that they backed off because she could expose it. But you take the average person, particularly those who live alone. Almost everybody is either single, without children. I personally have a child, but most people are alone that this happens to because it makes them easy targets. So our goals are to, first of all, educate, because if people don't know that this is happening, then the victims can't find other people to network with. So first we need to get together, and that's the first step. And the next step, once we have enough of us, is to start looking at legislation to control. There is no legislation to control the use of non-lethal weapons at all, because part of it is you can't prove that anyone's using it. It's completely hidden technology, so it's kind of hidden from the public as well. And I was in Washington a couple of weeks ago with a group in the U.S. that's trying to fight this, and the leader of that particular group went to a number of senators and told them about the situation. And he's kind of a moderately high-profile figure, so they kind of listened to him. And they said, well, write a bill, bring us a bill that that we can legislate for the use of the non-lethal weapons. And he has offered to come here. There's absolutely no legislation in Canada at all. So I'm hoping that maybe in a year or two that we can do a similar thing, go to Ottawa and start this process of holding someone accountable, at least making this legislation. Michigan has a bill, actually, that protects against the use of electromagnetic weapons, and it's the only one of its kind. And the other one is the European Parliament came up with a resolution 6 years ago to ban the development of all of these weapons. They call them manipulation weapons that can manipulate a human being, and yet nothing has come of that. They seem to be a little bit more aware in Europe of the threat and the danger of them. Here we tend to not be aware because there's nothing, we're not told anything by the media, except that, oh, this is new. This technology that's 35 years old is